Here is the translated narrative, adapted into clear, natural, and engaging American English for YouTube voice-over storytellers. I stood in front of the floor-to-soiling windows of my downtown high-rise office, running my fingers over the smooth crystal edge of a custom $2,000 vase. I'd spent weeks hunting down this exact piece for my younger sister Kendra's upcoming wedding. We've had our fair share of friction over the years, but I truly believed a gesture like this would finally bridge the distance between us. I picked up my phone and dialed my Aunt Viv, just to double-check driving routes and coordinate pickup times for the big day next weekend. The line went completely dead. The only thing coming through was the heavy, strained sound of her breath against the receiver. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped to a tense, guarded whisper. "Honey, Kendra got married on Martha's Vineyard last weekend. Did you really not know? I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why." I just set the receiver down, picked up that heavy crystal vase, and walked straight toward the elevator. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you've ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace of mind, let me know in the comments. My name is Zuri. I'm 33, and I'm the founder and CEO of Oasis Estates, a luxury real estate and hospitality management company I built completely from scratch. But to my family, I've always been the loud, difficult problem child, simply because I refused to shrink myself to fit their narrow expectations. The drive from my office to my parents' house in the suburbs takes 45 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio once. I kept my hands locked on the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I pulled up to their perfectly manicured lawn right in the middle of their sacred Sunday family dinner. I knew exactly who was sitting around that mahogany table. My mother Brenda, my father Jerome, Kendra, and her brand new husband, Connor. I didn't bother knocking. I raised my foot and kicked the front door wide open. The heavy oak slammed into the entryway wall with a thud that echoed through the entire house. Instantly, the laughter coming from the dining room died. I walked into the room holding that massive crystal vase with both hands. The air smelled like baked mac and cheese, collard greens, and fried chicken, classic comfort food, creating a surreal contrast to the hostility radiating off me. Every single one of them froze. Connor, a white guy from a wealthy old money background, looked like a deer caught in the headlights, fork hovering midair. Kendra shrank back into her chair, her eyes darting toward our mother in pure panic. Without saying a word, I raised that $2,000 vase and slammed it down onto the middle of the dining table. Plates shattered. Gravy and red wine splashed across my mother's immaculate lace tablecloth. The impact sent a heavy vibration right through the floorboards. "Have you lost your mind?" Brenda screamed, jumping out of her chair, frantically dabbing at the spilled wine. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't show a shred of guilt. Her immediate instinct was to protect her table runner. I completely ignored her, locking eyes with Kendra. "Martha's Vineyard," I said. My voice was low, laced with a dangerous level of calm. "You got married on Martha's Vineyard last weekend, and you didn't even have the basic human decency to tell me. You let me sit here for months talking about your big day, asking how I could help, while knowing the entire time I wasn't even on the guest list." Kendra looked down at her lap, avoiding my gaze. Connor cleared his throat nervously, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. But my father Jerome stood up, pointing a finger straight at my face. "You do not come into my house making a scene and disrespecting our Sunday dinner," he bellowed. "Your behavior right now is exact proof of why we knew you'd turn out this way." I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the dining room walls. "The person you knew I'd turn out to be? You mean someone who expects to be invited to her only sister's wedding?" Brenda slammed both hands on the table. Her eyes burned with that familiar, toxic rage I spent my whole childhood cowering from. But I wasn't a child anymore. "Since you want to kick down doors, let's lay all the cards on the table," Brenda snapped. "Connor's family comes from money, real money. They have a certain reputation in their community to uphold. You're too loud, Zuri. You're too independent. You strut around in bright-colored suits with your natural hair as big as it goes. You don't fit their country club image. We couldn't take the chance of you opening your mouth and embarrassing us in front of the Sterlings. A suffocating silence fell over the room. Arch. Connor looked visibly uncomfortable, but he didn't utter a single word to defend me. He just stared down at his plate, confirming everything I ever needed to know about him. I looked at my mother, letting her words settle in the air. Arch. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, standing there telling me straight to my face that my blackness, my confidence, and my success were liabilities to her social ambitions. Embarrassing you, I repeated quietly with a razor-sharp edge. I embarrass you. Then, let's talk about history, Brenda. Let's talk about who's really an embarrassment around here. Arch. I turned my full attention to Kendra, who cringed visibly in her seat. 10 years ago, when I needed a co-signer for a student loan to finish my business degree, you two sat at this exact table and told me no. You said my real estate goals were a joke and told me to get a stable desk job. Orch. But 2 years later, when Kendra wanted to open that tacky little clothing boutique, you took out a second mortgage on this house to fund it. Jerome crossed his arms defensively. We were supporting her dream. You always wanted to do things the hard way. And her dream went bankrupt in 8 months. I fired back. She wiped out your savings. She lost every single dollar of that investment. Orch. And me? I worked 3 jobs. I slept on a business partner's couch. I built Oasis Estates from nothing. I am a 33-year-old multimillionaire CEO. I employ 50 people. I handle deals with investors who have wealth Connor's parents couldn't dream of. Orch. My bright suits and my natural hair built a real empire, while you were busy shrinking yourselves trying to fit into a world that will never truly accept you. Connor finally found his voice. Look, Zuri, no one wanted to hurt your feelings. It was just a logistical call. My parents had a strict guest list limit, and we had to keep things contained. Orch. I turned my gaze on him, watching him instinctively pull back. Shut up, I told him. You sat back and let them erase me from my own family just to satisfy your mother's ridiculous country club list. You're a coward. And, Kendra, marrying a man who doesn't care about erasing your sister tells me everything about your future. Kendra finally looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. Zuri, please. Orch, you always turn everything into a show about you. You always have to dominate every space. I just wanted one day where the focus was entirely on me, without your overwhelming personality blotting everything out. I stared at her, feeling the very last thread of sisterhood snap. It was a clean break. No sorrow left in my heart, just profound, crystal clear clarity. Orch. You think my personality blots you out? I said softly. No, Kendra. Your own insecurity does that. You were so desperate for validation from a group of wealthy strangers that you threw away the only person who would have protected you from them. I looked around at the shattered crystal, the spilled wine, and the shocked faces of the people I once called family. Orch. In that moment, I realized I'd spent my entire adult life trying to prove my worth to people committed to misunderstanding me. They didn't want me to succeed. They just wanted me manageable. You got what you wanted, I told them. You'll never have to worry about me embarrassing you again. Because as of right now, I don't have a sister and I don't have parents. Orch. Zuri, don't be so dramatic, Jerome rolled his eyes. You'll calm down in a week. I won't, I assured him. Enjoy the vase, Kendra. It cost $2,000. Consider it a parting gift. I suggest you sweep it up before it ruins Mom's cheap rug. I turned my back on them and walked out the front door. Orch. The cool evening air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of freedom expand in my lungs. Walking to my car, I pulled out my phone. I blocked Kendra's number. I blocked Brenda's number. I blocked Jerome's. I deleted them from my contacts entirely, backed out of the driveway, and didn't look in the rearview mirror once. I thought that was the end of it. Orch. I thought I had successfully removed the toxic element from my life. I went right back to running my company, signing contracts, and expanding my real estate portfolio. I poured my energy into work, surrounded by my chosen family and my fiercely loyal team. I had no idea their audacity knew no bounds. Ouch. I had no idea that just 3 weeks later, they would try to use me to impress the very people they hid me from in the first place. And I certainly didn't expect that I was about to set a trap so devastating, it would dismantle them financially. For 3 full weeks, there was complete radio silence. That was standard operating procedure for my family. Ouch. They thought giving me the silent treatment was a punishment that would eventually bring me crawling back to beg for forgiveness. But they vastly underestimated the peace that silence brought me. During those 21 days, I closed a massive commercial acquisition and finalized the design plans for our newest downtown boutique hotel. Ouch. My business partner and head of asset management, Trey, and I were running on espresso and pure ambition. The cloud of family drama was entirely in my rearview mirror. I was at the top of my game. Then came a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at the glass conference table, reviewing quarterly projections when my personal phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, mainly because I had deleted all their contacts, but I knew the area code. Against my better judgment, I answered and put it on speaker. "Hey, Zuri!" A bright, hurried voice chimed through the speaker. "It's Kendra. How are you doing?" I stared at the phone. I actually looked around my empty office to check if I was being pranked. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman calling me on a Tuesday afternoon using a casual tone, 3 weeks after hiding her wedding from me, was mind-boggling. No apology, no hesitation. Just that fake, sweet tone she uses whenever she's preparing to ask for a favor. I kept my voice completely flat. "Why are you calling me from an unlisted number, Kendra?" "Oh, I changed my number," she lied smoothly. "Connor and I are upgrading to a joint plan. Anyway, I'm so glad I reached you. We actually have a minor family emergency, and you're really the only one who can save the day." I leaned back in my leather office chair, crossing my arms. "I don't have a family, Kendra, so I highly doubt I can help you with a family emergency." She let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, completely ignoring my boundary. "Look, I know things were a little tense at Sunday dinner, but we're sisters. We need to move past it. Connor's parents, Richard and Patricia, insist on hosting a family bonding weekend this Friday. They want both sets of parents and the newlyweds under one roof for 3 days to connect. They're huge on family tradition and unity." I stayed completely quiet, letting the silence stretch. I knew she hated silence. It forced her to fill the air with her own insecurities. "Here's the thing," Kendra continued, her speech accelerating. "Patricia Sterling kept boasting about their summer home in the Hamptons, and I panicked a little. I told them our family also owns a charming lakefront property. I mentioned it's been in our family for years, and that it would be the perfect rustic getaway for everyone to bond." I raised an eyebrow. My mind immediately connected the dots. Our parents didn't own a lake house. They owned a heavily mortgaged suburban home. The only person in our entire bloodline who owned waterfront property was me. 5 years ago, when I first started flipping properties, I bought a rundown 2-bedroom fishing cabin on Lake Oconee. It was practically a dump back then. Brenda and Kendra mocked me for buying it, calling it a moldy shack fit for raccoons. They even refused to come take a look. "You want to use my property?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You want to bring the in-laws you hid me from to my house? It's just your old fishing cabin, Zuri," Kendra pleaded, dropping the sweet facade and letting her desperation show. "It's out in the woods. Very private. I know it might be a bit rough, but Connor's parents love that rustic vibe. We'll bring air mattresses if we have to." "Please, Zuri. I've already told them we're hosting. If I have to call Patricia and tell her I lied, she'll look down on me forever. She already thinks I'm not good enough for her son. I need this weekend to go smoothly." The irony was overwhelming. My sister, The same sister who deemed me too loud and unacceptable for her high society wedding was now begging to use my asset to sustain her fragile illusions of wealth. She still thought I owned a broken-down shack. She had never bothered to ask about my business growth over the last 5 years. She didn't know that my company, Oasis Estates, had demolished that moldy cabin 3 years ago. Which, before I could construct a response, rustling sounds came through the speaker. My mother's heavy, impatient breathing took over the line. "Zuri, listen carefully," Brenda commanded. Her voice was stripped of any maternal warmth, replaced entirely by cold entitlement. "Your sister is in a tough spot, and this is no time for your personal grudges. Your little stunt 3 weeks ago ruined our dinner, broke my crystal, and embarrassed us in front of Connor. You owe your sister this favor." I exhaled slowly, deliberately. "I owe her?" "Yes, you owe her," Brenda snapped. "We're not asking for a kidney, Zuri. We just need the keys to that little lake cabin. We'll clean up before we leave. We'll even leave you a bottle of wine." Connor's family expects a certain level of hospitality, and we have to deliver. So for once in your life, stop being so difficult. Just text us the address, leave the keys under the mat, and we won't even need to interact with you. I looked out the office window at the city skyline. A normal person would have hung up. A normal person would have lost their temper over the disrespect. But I'm not a normal person. I'm a businesswoman who handles high-stakes contracts and corporate liabilities. An absolute, devastating plan materialized in my head. They wanted to play rich. They wanted to use my property to show off to the Sterlings. They wanted to treat me like an invisible caretaker while excluding me from their lives. I decided right then and there that I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to give them enough rope to hang themselves financially. "You know what, Mom?" I spoke up, making my tone suddenly light and agreeable. "You're right. Family is family. I shouldn't let a feud get in the way of Kendra bonding with her new in-laws." I heard the distinct sound of both of them exhaling in relief. "I knew you'd come to your senses eventually," Brenda said, her tone instantly shifting to smug satisfaction. "Just text the address and the door code to Kendra. We'll head out Friday morning." "Hold on," I smoothly interrupted. "You can certainly use the lake property, but there's one small detail. 2 years ago, I transferred ownership of that property under my corporate holding company. It's technically a corporate asset now. Trey, my partner, handles all operational logistics. For insurance purposes, my provider requires all guests to sign a standard liability waiver before stepping foot on the grounds. It's basic legal protection in case anyone trips or breaks something." "A liability waiver?" Kendra groaned in the background. "Zuri, come on. We're family, not a fraternity throwing a party. It's non-negotiable, Kendra," I said firmly. "Company policy. It takes 2 seconds to sign electronically. If you want the rustic lake cabin for your little weekend, I need the signed document. Otherwise, I can't issue the entry code. It's out of my hands." Brenda clicked her tongue in annoyance. "Fine. Send over your silly paperwork. Kendra will sign it right now. Just make sure the entry code works. Patricia Sterling doesn't like waiting around." "I'll send it straight to your email, Kendra," I said, bringing up my keyboard. "Have a wonderful bonding weekend. I really hope it turns out to be everything you deserve." Before they could say another word, I ended the call. I sat in my quiet office as a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I opened my legal templates folder. It was time to draft a very specific short-term commercial lease agreement. They thought they were heading to a moldy fishing cabin with air mattresses. They were about to walk into an architectural masterpiece and sign away their financial lives without even realizing it. I pressed the intercom button and asked Trey to step into my office immediately. Trey was a sharp, brilliant strategist who had helped me build Oasis Estates into a powerhouse. He walked through my double glass doors holding a stack of zoning permits, but the moment he caught the look on my face, he stopped dead in his tracks. He dropped the folder onto my desk, and asked who I was planning to destroy. I leaned back and told him my sister Kendra was taking her new husband and his wealthy parents to our Lake Oconee estate this weekend. Trey let out a loud laugh. Orch. Leaning over my desk, he asked if my family had lost their minds. He knew exactly what the Lake Oconee property was. It was our crown jewel, a venue reserved strictly for high-net-worth corporate clients and celebrity investors. I smiled and shook my head, telling him they had no idea what was actually built on that land now. Orch. They think they're driving out to a rundown, two-bedroom fishing shack with a caved-in roof. Trey pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He asked how my own mother and sister could be completely blind to a $4.5 million compound. I explained that it was simple. They never cared enough to look. Orch. 5 years ago, when I bought the original parcel at a county auction, I was so proud. It was my very first independent acquisition. I invited Brenda and Kendra to drive up and see it. They showed up in expensive heels and refused to even step out of the car. Brenda rolled down the passenger window, looked at the rotting timber, and told me I was playing in the mud and throwing my life away. Orch. She said I had zero vision and would be bankrupt before 30. They left in under 10 minutes and never brought it up again. For 5 full years, they never asked about my business. They never looked at my company website. They were so committed to framing me as a loud, embarrassing failure that they intentionally ignored my rise in the luxury real estate market. Orch. Trey pulled up his tablet and opened the live security feed for the Lake Estate. Together, we looked at the screen. The property was a modern architectural marvel. Custom black timber framing, floor-to-ceiling smart glass spanning the rear, and an infinity pool that looked like it dropped straight into the lake. Orch. Inside was a chef's kitchen, a climate-controlled wine cellar, and a curated collection of original African-American art I'd spent years acquiring. It was an estate built for billionaires. Trey looked up from the tablet and asked what Kendra would do when she pulled up to the security gates and saw a mansion instead of a shack. She's going to lie, I said without hesitation. Orch. Kendra is terrified of Connor and his parents. The Sterlings represent everything she's ever wanted: old money status and country club exclusivity. She bragged to them that our family owned a quaint getaway to prove she came from wealth. When she walks through those custom mahogany doors, there is no way she'll admit the property belongs to the sister she excluded from her wedding. She'll panic. Orch. She'll look at that high-end decor and claim the house as her own new summer estate. Brenda will instantly back her up to impress the in-laws. They'll steal my success and wear it like a costume. Trey smirked, tapping his stylus against the desk. He said we needed to make sure that costume came with an extremely steep rental fee. Orch. I turned to my computer and opened a blank email draft, putting Kendra's address in the recipient line. I told Trey we had to set the hook perfectly. I couldn't send a massive, intimidating legal document right away, or they might get suspicious. I needed to wrap the trap in corporate red tape so they'd swallow the bait whole. As I typed, I read the email aloud to Trey. Orch. Hey Kendra, attached is the standard liability waiver for the cabin. It's just basic company policy since my holding company owns the deed now. I need your signature so the system can automatically generate your temporary access code and unlock the front door. Have a great weekend. I kept my tone, light, casual, and completely unbothered. I knew my mother and sister too well. Orch. They'd see the words standard liability waiver and assume it was a meaningless piece of paper protecting me in case someone tripped over a tree root. They would never suspect that what I was actually sending was a binding commercial lease agreement disguised as a liability form. Trey asked about the staff. We currently had 2 full-time corporate employees managing the estate. Orch. Jamal was our head groundskeeper, and Maya was the estate director who prepared the property for VIP clients. I picked up the phone and called Maya directly. She answered on the second ring. I put it on speaker so Trey could listen in. I told Maya that an unusual group of guests would be arriving Friday morning. porch. I instructed her explicitly that she and Jamal were to stay on the property, but they had to maintain strict corporate boundaries. Maya asked if she needed to arrange welcome catering or set up the master suite. I told her absolutely not. I instructed her to lock up the top-shelf spirits and seal off the main suite. Porch. I told her the arriving guests were my estranged family, but they were not to be treated as family. They were short-term commercial renters. I told Maya that under no circumstances was she to act as their personal servant. She was not to cook for them, clean up after them, or carry their luggage. Porch. Her only job was to observe, protect corporate assets, and report any code of conduct violations straight to Trey. Maya was a seasoned professional who had dealt with demanding high-profile clients before. She immediately understood the assignment, promising to keep the security cameras running and the property secured. I hung up and looked back at my computer screen. Porch. The email to Kendra was ready. My mouse hovered over the send button, and I felt a cool rush of total control. My whole life, Brenda and Kendra had dictated the terms of my existence. They decided when I was acceptable and when I was an embarrassment. They controlled the narrative, isolated me from family events, and treated my ambition like a joke. But this was my domain now. Porch. They were stepping onto my property, entering my world, and they were going to play by my rules. I clicked send. The email vanished from my outbox, traveling across the network straight to my sister's phone. I told Trey to put legal on standby. The bait was in the water, and the clock was officially ticking. I was certain they wouldn't be able to resist the illusion of wealth. Porch. They were about to walk into a world they couldn't afford, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single lie they told. I leaned back in my leather chair, watching the delivery notification pop up on my screen. The email had landed in her inbox. I looked at Trey, who had already pulled up the document tracking software on his tablet. Porch. We used a specialized enterprise program that monitored precisely when a client opened a contract, how long they stayed on each page, and when they applied an e-signature. It was originally designed for negotiating with corporate entities, but today it was going to serve as the ultimate lie detector for my own sister. Porch. Trey shook his head, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water from the office bar. He asked if I really thought Kendra wouldn't consult a lawyer before signing a 30-page commercial lease. I told him she wouldn't even read the first paragraph. Kendra and Brenda operated on a mix of arrogance and desperation. Porch. In their minds, I was still the embarrassing outcast they had to hide from polite society. They genuinely believed they were smarter than me. They assumed I had just forwarded a random internet template to protect my rundown fishing shack. The idea that I possessed the corporate infrastructure to draft an airtight financial trap wouldn't even cross their minds. Porch. Reading fine print is something done by people who respect the person handing them the contract. They had zero respect for me, which meant they were walking in blind. I had Trey project the contract onto the main display screen so we could review the exact terms. I wanted to ensure every trap was set perfectly. Porch. The document Kendra was currently ignoring was a masterclass in corporate liability law. I had taken our standard agreement for celebrity clients and specifically weaponized it against my family's toxic habits. I knew how they operated. I had 33 years of experience watching them ruin my things while refusing to take responsibility. First was the property damage clause. Porch. Growing up, Kendra constantly snuck into my room, borrowing my favorite clothes without asking. When she inevitably spilled wine or tore a seam, she'd shove the ruined item back into my closet and gaslight me into believing I had done it myself. Brenda always backed her up, calling me careless. Porch. So I made sure the contract specified a mandatory $10,000 fine for any physical damage to the estate's custom finishes. If they scratched the marble countertops or stained the imported rugs, my company would automatically charge the credit card placed on hold in the system. Next was the occupancy limit. Kendra was a social climber drowning in her own insecurities. Orch. She married into the Sterling family to secure status she couldn't afford on her own. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the chance to show off. A luxury lakefront estate was the ultimate flex for her brand new wealthy persona. I told Trey there was no way Kendra would keep this weekend limited to just immediate family. She'd try to throw a party. Orch. She'd invite Connor's country club friends to prove she belonged in their tax bracket. I pointed to Section 4 of the contract. We strictly capped the maximum occupancy at 10 people. Any unauthorized guests or unapproved gatherings would trigger an immediate $5,000 penalty, plus steep hourly fees for every unauthorized person on the premises. Orch. But the crown jewel of the document was buried deep in Section 12. Corporate misrepresentation and false ownership. This was a specific legal clause we used to prevent social media influencers from filming music videos on our properties and claiming they owned the real estate. Orch. The clause stated that renters were strictly prohibited from representing themselves as the owners of the estate to any third party. Doing so would automatically trigger a $25,000 fine for reputation damage and corporate misrepresentation. I knew Kendra had already told the Sterlings the house was hers. I knew Brenda had confirmed the lie. Orch. I wanted to see how far they'd push that delusion when standing in an actual $4.5 million compound. Every single time she opened her mouth to claim my hard work as her own, she would owe me $25,000. Trey whistled softly as he reviewed the fee structure, remarking that we could bankrupt them by Sunday morning. I told him they were bankrupting themselves. Orch. I wasn't forcing them to break the rules. I was simply making them pay for their lack of integrity. My whole life they treated my boundaries like suggestions. This time my boundaries were backed by a corporate legal team and binding arbitration agreements. A sharp chime echoed through my office. Trey and I turned our attention to the tracking software on his tablet. Orch. The screen flashed a vibrant green. Kendra had opened the email. I pulled up the live timer on my monitor. We watched the seconds tick away. The software displayed her exact activity. She scrolled past the title page, skipped the occupancy limits, and bypassed the liability clauses. She didn't pause to read a single financial penalty. Orch. The little digital indicator zipped straight to the bottom of page 30. I checked the timer. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. That was all the time she took to evaluate a legally binding commercial contract. She was so desperate to secure her fake wealthy lifestyle that she willingly walked right into the slaughterhouse. Another crisp chime sounded. Orch. The document status updated from pending to executed. Kendra had officially applied her electronic signature. She confirmed her agreement to every single exorbitant penalty clause I had hidden in the text. By signing, she also legally consented to the presence of security cameras in all common areas of the estate, a detail clearly noted on page 5. Orch. She had handed me the remote control to her own destruction. Trey broke into a laugh, shaking his head as he finalized the document on our corporate server, amazed at how easy it was. He asked if we should send her the gate code now. I told him to send the temporary access code and nothing else. No thank you. No wishing her a nice trip. The trap was set. The weapon was loaded. Orch. The legal snare had tightened around their ankles, and it was a knot they had tied themselves. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the glass window, looking down at the busy city streets below. The heavy anger that had been weighing on me since Sunday dinner was replaced by a sharp sense of anticipation. They had excluded me from the wedding because I didn't fit their aesthetic. Orch. They tried to erase me just to make themselves look better in front of wealthy strangers. Now they were going to spend the entire weekend on my stage, using my props, under my watch, performing their absurd high society drama. I turned around and told Trey to contact Jamal and Maya at the estate. I wanted all security cameras checked and all audio feeds tested. Orch. I wanted every angle of the living room, kitchen, and patio recorded in high definition. If Kendra and Brenda wanted to put on a show, I was going to make sure we captured every single moment of the performance. Friday morning approached rapidly. The Sterling family's bonding weekend was about to begin. I grabbed my suit jacket and told Trey to clear my schedule for Friday. We had a front row seat to the best reality show in town, and I wasn't going to miss a single second. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and zero distractions. I had my assistant hold all my calls and reschedule my meetings. My office was officially converted into a private monitoring command center. Trey connected his tablet directly to the massive flat-screen television mounted on my wall. We sat side by side at the polished glass conference table, armed with fresh coffee and legal pads, waiting for the show to begin. At exactly 10:45 a.m., two sleek luxury SUVs pulled up to the custom wrought iron gates of my Lake Oconee compound. Through the high-definition camera mounted at the entrance, I saw a silver Range Rover idling in front of the keypad. Kendra was sitting in the passenger seat. I could clearly see her manicured hand reaching out the window, typing in the temporary access code I had generated specifically for her. The heavy black gates swung open smoothly and silently, welcoming them straight into the trap. The Range Rover pulled through, followed closely by a black Porsche SUV. The camera angles switched automatically, tracking the vehicles as they drove up the quarter-mile driveway, lined with imported gravel. They parked in the circular motor court directly facing the main house. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I leaned forward and turned up the volume on the desktop speakers. Our outdoor security microphones picked up every crunch of gravel and every sharp gasp of air. Kendra and Connor were the first ones out of the Rover, and I watched my sister freeze in her tracks. Her jaw literally dropped. She just stood there, staring blankly as the morning light reflected off a massive structure of black steel and floor-to-ceiling smart glass. She had shown up expecting a run-down, moldy shack with a sagging roof. Instead, she was standing at the threshold of a $4.5 million architectural masterpiece. My parents climbed out of the back. As soon as Brenda stepped onto the driveway, she grabbed Jerome's arm for support. Her eyes darted around frantically, taking in the manicured landscaping, the custom water features, and the sheer scale of the estate. Jerome looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Deep down, they both knew this was my property. They knew I owned the land. But for 5 long years they had convinced themselves I was just playing in the dirt. Now, the reality of my success was staring them dead in the face, completely paralyzing them. Then, the doors of the Porsche opened. Richard and Patricia Sterling stepped out. Connor's parents were the absolute picture of old money privilege. Dressed in soft linens and wearing expensive sunglasses, they moved with that slow, effortless confidence of people who own the world and know it. Patricia adjusted her silk scarf and looked up at the main house. I leaned in closer to the monitor. Even through a screen, the tension in the air was palpable. "Oh my, Connor?" Patricia began, her voice carrying crisp and clear over the audio feed. "You described this as a quaint, rustic little cabin. I must say, darling, your modesty was entirely misplaced. This estate is absolutely magnificent." Panic surged across Kendra's face. She darted a quick glance at Connor, who looked back at the house. In less than a second, I watched his ego take the steering wheel. He couldn't bring himself to admit to his wealthy parents that he was borrowing a house from his estranged black sister-in-law. He couldn't admit that he and his new bride were essentially charity cases, leeching off a property they couldn't afford in a million years. Connor shoved his hands into his pockets and let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "Surprise, Mom." We wanted to keep it under wraps until everything was finalized. Kendra and I actually just bought this place as our new summer getaway. Trey choked on his coffee. He slapped a hand over his mouth, coughing frantically while pointing at the screen. I didn't laugh. I sat completely still, my eyes locked on my sister. In that exact moment, Kendra had a choice. Porch. She could have laughed it off and set the record straight. She could have told them the truth, that this belonged to my sister Zuri. But her desperate need for Patricia's approval was a sickness. Kendra looped her arm through Connor's and flashed her brightest fake smile. "Surprise?" she echoed. Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly covered it up. "Porch. We knew how much you loved lakefront properties, Patricia, so we wanted to host you at our own estate for our first official family bonding weekend." My blood ran cold, but my mind was firing at full speed. Section 12 of the Commercial Lease Agreement explicitly banned false claims of ownership. That carried an automatic $25,000 fine. Porch. They hadn't even been on my property for 4 minutes, and they had already tripped the most expensive trap I had set. Patricia clapped her hands together, looking genuinely impressed. She walked over to Kendra and kissed her on both cheeks. "Oh my goodness, how wonderful. Richard, look at what the kids did. It's so modern, so bold. Brenda, Jerome, you must be so incredibly proud of them." Porch. I shifted my focus to my mother on the monitor. Brenda was a master manipulator. She knew Connor was lying, and she knew Kendra was lying. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that her youngest daughter didn't have the credit score to pay for the estate's landscaping, let alone the deed. But Brenda's addiction to social climbing far outweighed her grasp on reality. Porch. Seeing Patricia Sterling look at her with genuine respect for the first time, Brenda couldn't resist claiming a piece of the pie. Brenda puffing out her chest, flashing Patricia a warm, triumphant smile. "Oh, we really are so happy for them, Patricia. You know how hard Connor and Kendra work. They deserve a beautiful sanctuary like this." Porch. "We told them this lake was the perfect investment for their new life together." Jerome nodded right along with her, hands in his pockets, admiring the architecture, as if he had personally supervised the blueprints. I reached out and hit a key on my keyboard, officially timestamping the conversation. I looked over at Trey. Porch. He was wiping tears of laughter from his eyes while typing furiously on his tablet. He asked if I wanted him to process the $25,000 invoice right now or wait until Monday. "Keep tallying," I told him. "The weekend is just getting started." Porch. If they're willing to lie about owning a $4.5 million compound within the first 5 minutes of arriving, there's no telling what they'll do once they get inside. On the screen, the group began moving toward the massive front door. Connor grabbed the handle with unearned confidence, swinging it open to reveal the breathtaking interior. Porch. The 2-story foyer featured a floating glass staircase and a direct sightline straight through the living room to the infinity pool and the lake beyond. I watched Patricia Sterling step into my foyer and gasp. She immediately started praising the custom imported tile and the vaulted ceilings. Porch. Connor soaked up every bit of it, nodding along and pointing out architectural features as if he were showcasing his own design genius. I leaned back, crossed my legs, and watched the feed with cold, calculated satisfaction. They were turning my life's work into a backdrop for their luxury theater. To elevate themselves, they were erasing me from my own success. Porch. It was the exact same thing they had done to me my entire life, but this time they were doing it on camera. And this time, they were doing it under a legally binding contract. They thought they were invincible behind those gates. They had no idea they had just locked themselves inside my vault. I told Trey to bring up the internal cameras. It was time to see how they treated the staff. Porch. Trey tapped the screen and my office's main display switched to the interior entryway camera. The audio was crystal clear. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and the group poured into the grand entryway. My estate director, Maya, and my head groundskeeper, Jamal, were standing near the cascading water feature. Porch. They wore our company's signature charcoal blazers, with the Oasis Estates logo discreetly embroidered on the lapel. They looked like high-level corporate executives, because that's exactly what they were. Kendra strutted in first, taking a deep breath of the climate-controlled air. The moment she spotted Jamal, her posture shifted. Porch. She squared her shoulders, attempting to mimic the careless air of superiority she'd seen in movies. No greeting, no introduction. She literally snapped her fingers in the air, pointing toward the driveway. "You over there," she barked, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "Go get the luggage out of the Rover and the Porsche. Be careful with the leather bags, they're imported." Porch. I watched Jamal place his hands behind his back. He didn't even blink. He simply offered a polite, professional smile. "Welcome to the estate, ma'am," he said smoothly. "I'm Jamal, head groundskeeper. I manage the exterior landscape, the infinity pool balance, and overall perimeter security. We don't offer bellhop services here, but there are luggage carts in the mudroom to your left." Porch. Kendra froze. The illusion she was trying to sell Patricia and Richard was instantly threatened. A real billionaire wouldn't carry her own bags. She panicked, her face turning beet red, and immediately doubled down on her hostility. "I don't care what your ridiculous title is," she snapped, taking a step toward him. "I am the owner of this house. You work for me." Porch. "When I tell you to get the bags, you get the bags." I shook my head at the screen. Classic Kendra. Growing up, whenever my mother felt insecure about our financial struggles, she would take it out on minimum wage service workers. Brenda would humiliate cashiers and wait staff just to feel a fleeting sense of power, and she had taught Kendra to do the exact same thing. Porch. But Maya and Jamal weren't defenseless teenagers. They were high-salaried corporate executives who reported directly to me. Patricia Sterling shifted uncomfortably near the doorway. Clutching her designer handbag, she looked at Kendra with a mix of surprise and subtle distaste. Old money might be elitist, but they rarely screamed at staff in the foyer. They viewed it as utterly tacky. Porch. Kendra was spilling her insecurities all over my marble floor. Maya stepped forward smoothly, intervening before Jamal had to repeat himself. "Good morning, everyone," Maya said. Her tone was a masterclass in icy corporate etiquette. "I'm Maya, the estate director. I handle the property's technical infrastructure, smart home systems, and corporate compliance. Porch. If you need assistance operating the climate controls or security panels, I'm your point of contact. Beyond that, we stay out of your way so you can enjoy your stay." Kendra's head snapped toward her, catching the word stay. She let out a loud cough to cover it up, pointing a manicured finger directly at Maya's chest. "Fine," Kendra spat. Porch. "If you're the director, direct yourself into the kitchen. My in-laws have been traveling all morning. I expect a welcome brunch prepared immediately. 5 courses. And go ahead and open whatever vintage champagne you have stored in the wine cellar." Trey let out a sharp laugh in my office, muttering that Kendra was writing her own financial death warrant. Porch. Entering the locked wine cellar without prior authorization was a direct violation of Section 8. Maya didn't flinch. Keeping her hands neatly folded, she offered another calm smile. "I apologize for the inconvenience," Maya said, "but this property does not include private catering services unless contracted and paid for under our premium hospitality package." Porch. "According to the specific agreement executed electronically this morning, you selected the basic self-service option. You are more than welcome to use the chef's kitchen to prepare your own meals." The silence in the foyer was deafening. Connor looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding his parents' eyes. Porch. Richard Sterling raised an eyebrow, looking straight at his son, asking if they hadn't hired a private chef for the weekend. Connor stammered out a pathetic excuse about a scheduling conflict with the catering company. But Kendra had completely lost control. She couldn't handle being denied in front of her wealthy new in-laws. She stomped her foot against the tile. Porch. "Listen to me, you lazy, incompetent woman," Kendra shrieked, shoving her finger right in Maya's face. "I don't care about a basic package. I am ordering you to cook for us right now, or I will have you fired before lunch. Do you have any idea who I am? I will destroy your career." I leaned into the monitor. Porch. My blood was boiling, but my focus was laser sharp. Threatening my staff and creating a hostile environment was a clear breach of the conduct clause. Maya stood her ground. She looked Kendra up and down with the expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice dropping an octave. "I don't work for you. I work for Oasis Estates. My employment is entirely secure." Orch. "I strongly suggest you review the binding legal documents you signed this morning before making any further demands of corporate personnel. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have security protocols to monitor." Maya turned and walked calmly down the hallway toward the staff operations room. Jamal gave a crisp nod to the utterly bewildered Sterling family before following right behind her. Kendra stood in the middle of the grand foyer, trembling with rage and humiliation. She turned back to Patricia and Richard, trying to force a wild, awkward laugh. "It's just so hard to find good help these days," Kendra squeaked out. "Their sense of entitlement is completely out of control. I'm going to have to make some serious staffing changes next week." Patricia offered a tight, forced smile. "Yes, dear," Patricia murmured, looking past Kendra toward the living room. "Why don't we just grab our own bags?" "Connor, sweetie, go grab the luggage." As Connor trudged back out to the driveway, Brenda finally made her move. She couldn't stand watching her golden child look so foolish. Pulling her phone out of her purse, Brenda's face twisted into a familiar mask of vicious fury. I watched her aggressively tap the screen on the camera, dialing a number. 2 seconds later, my personal phone on my desk began to ring. I looked down at the caller ID. Brenda. I looked over at Trey and grinned. She was asking for the manager. She was calling to complain about the disrespectful staff, ready to demand that I force my highly trained corporate executives to fry her eggs and carry her bags. I answered the call. I didn't say hello. I just let the line open, waiting for the explosion. Hitting the green button on the console, I let the speakerphone broadcast my mother's rage across my broad glass desk. "Zuri, what kind of circus are you running out there?" Brenda's voice was sharp enough to shatter glass. "Your sister is trying to entertain her new in-laws, and your so-called staff is treating us like trash." "I demand you call them right now and tell them to get into that kitchen and make us a proper brunch." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished glass. "Good morning, Brenda. I see you made it through the security gates without scraping the stonework." "Don't get smart with me," she barked, and I could hear the panicked edge in her voice. Patricia was probably standing less than 20 feet away, judging every interaction. Kendra explicitly asked that rude woman in the hallway to open a bottle of vintage champagne and make us something hot. The woman practically laughed in her face and walked off. "This is why you struggle in business, Zuri. You have zero control over your subordinates. Now pick up your phone, call that woman back, and tell her to serve the Sterlings." I looked at Trey. He was already laughing silently, mouthing the words. "Harassment clause. Section 7, paragraph B." I gave him a subtle nod. "Let's get something straight," I said, my voice dropping into that deadly corporate calm that makes even the toughest negotiators sweat. Maya is the estate director. Jamal is the head groundskeeper. They are highly educated, well-compensated corporate executives who manage multi-million-dollar assets. They are not your personal maids, they are not your cooks, and they are certainly not hired help for you to snap your fingers at just to put on a show for a group of wealthy white people. "We are your family," Brenda screamed, her volume rising dangerously. "Kendra is your sister. She told Connor's parents this house belongs to our family. We have an image to uphold. You are intentionally trying to sabotage her new marriage because you're bitter and jealous." I let out a dry, humorless chuckle that echoed in the quiet office. Jealous? Jealous of a man who lied to his parents to save face, and a sister who had to steal my success just to feel worthy of standing in the same room as him? Please. You wanted the rustic cabin experience, and you signed a basic self-service lease. If you wanted the premium VIP catering package, Kendra should have selected that option at checkout. That requires 72 hours notice and a $10,000 non-refundable deposit. I am your mother, Brenda growled, dropping her voice into a venomous hiss so the Sterlings wouldn't hear her losing control. I carried you for 9 months. You owe me. You owe this family respect. Arch. I am ordering you to tell your staff to make us a meal, or I swear to God I will drive to whatever little rental office you're working out of and humiliate you in front of your entire staff. The sheer audacity of her threat was poetic. Here she was, standing in an empire I built with my own hands, lying to wealthy strangers for white validation, while threatening to humiliate me. Arch. My mind flashed back to when I was 19, standing in her kitchen, begging her to co-sign a tiny business loan so I could buy my first flip property. She had looked me dead in the eye and told me I was a terrible investment with no focus. 6 months later, she drained her emergency savings to buy Kendra a luxury car, just so my sister could keep up with her wealthy sorority friends. Arch. You don't have security clearance to enter my corporate building, I answered smoothly, tapping my pen against the desk. And you certainly don't have the authority to command my staff. You are a short-term tenant currently legally bound by the contract Kendra signed at 8:45 this morning. I don't give a damn about some online waiver, Brenda yelled, completely losing her composure. Arch. You really should, I said, because under Section 7, Paragraph B of that legally binding corporate document, abusive language, threatening behavior, or harassment directed at any Oasis Estates personnel results in an immediate $2,500 fine. You just threatened my estate director, and you just threatened me. Arch. Brenda gasped, as if the air had been sucked straight out of her lungs. You wouldn't dare. Trey, I said out loud, making sure my voice carried clearly through the speakerphone so my mother heard every syllable. Please log a Section 7 violation for the Lake Oconee property. Charge the card on hold immediately. Arch. Already done, boss, Trey answered cheerfully, his fingers flying across his tablet. InvoRip updated, and the penalty has been officially processed. You're insane, Brenda shrieked. You are a bitter, malicious girl. I am a CEO, I corrected her, my tone turning to ice. And my employees are non-negotiable. If you or Kendra raise your voice to Maya or Jamal again, I won't just fine you. Arch. I will have my private security team escort you off the premises for trespassing. Enjoy your self-service brunch, Brenda. I hear tap water pairs wonderfully with delusion. I cut the connection, the dial tone echoing loudly in my office. On the massive security monitor, I watched the immediate fallout in high definition. Brenda pulled the phone away from her ear, her face contorted in sheer shock. Arch. She stared straight at the screen as if the device had physically slapped her. Quickly shoving the phone back into her designer purse, she forced a frantic, terrifying fake smile onto her face, but before turning back to face the living room. Patricia Sterling was standing near the custom stone fireplace, running her hand along the imported mantelpiece. Arch. Brenda? Patricia asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. You seemed quite upset just now. Is there an issue with the booking agency? Brenda swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. I could see the panic radiating from her stiff posture. Oh no, not at all, Patricia. Just a tiny miscommunication with the property management company we use to oversee the estate while we're away. Arch. They sent the wrong staff roster. So silly. Just a minor administrative glitch. Kendra rushed over, grabbing Connor's arm tightly. Exactly. We normally have our own private chef here, but you know how unreliable these boutique agencies have been lately. Connor, why don't we drive into town and pick up some artisanal pastries and fresh fruit? It'll be fun. A cute little morning run. Arch. Connor forced a tight, panicked smile. Yeah, absolutely, let's do that. As Kendra and Connor hurried out the grand front door, leaving their parents standing awkwardly in my foyer, Trey synced his tablet to the main display on my wall. A bright red rolling financial tally appeared in the top right corner of the screen. False claims of ownership. $25,000 staff harassment. $2,500. Arch. The meter was officially running, and the weekend getaway hadn't even been underway for an hour. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee. My family was trapped in a pressure cooker of their own making. Surrounded by my personal millions, they were desperately trying to maintain a fragile illusion of wealth they didn't possess, completely unaware that every lie they told was being tracked, logged, and converted into cold, hard debt. The conflict was just getting started, and the real test would be seeing just how long they could wear the mask before the financial weight crushed them completely. Saturday morning arrived with bright, blinding sunlight, the kind of weather that usually made lakefront properties look like paradise. I sat back at the glass conference table in my office, holding a fresh cup of dark roast. Trey sat beside me, all security feeds already pulled up. After my mother hung up the phone on Friday, the rest of the evening had been relatively quiet. Maya reported that they ate cold sandwiches and drank cheap wine brought in their own bags, unable to access my locked wine cellar. But I knew the peace wouldn't last. Kendra was too desperate to show off. She needed an audience. At exactly 7:30 a.m., a massive white commercial van pulled up to the security gate. Printed on the side in large letters was the logo for Elite Catering Services. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Jamal was calling from the gatehouse for instructions. Leaning over, I hit the button and told him to let them through, but to log the license plate and exact arrival time. Trey switched the main wall monitor to the patio camera. Kendra was rushing out the back door in a silk robe, waving her arms frantically. A team of 6 caterers began unloading warming trays, a champagne tower, and massive floral arrangements. She was setting up a full-blown high society brunch right on my imported teak deck, bossing the catering crew around and pointing toward the infinity pool, demanding a mimosa bar right by the water's edge. A few minutes later, Brenda joined her on the patio holding a cup of coffee, dressed in a pastel pink pantsuit clearly meant to mimic Patricia Sterling's country club style. I turned up the audio feed. Brenda was obsessing over the napkin folds, snapping at Kendra to make sure the silverware was polished impeccably, repeatedly mentioning that Connor's friends were arriving soon, and that they needed to show everyone this family had class. Connor's friends. Trey and I exchanged a smile. The trap was closing faster than I had anticipated. By 9 a.m., the invasion officially began. The front gate camera captured a steady stream of luxury vehicles pulling into my private driveway. A silver Mercedes arrived, followed by 2 Teslas and a bright red G-Wagon. My driveway was spacious, but it was designed to accommodate 6 cars at most. In under 20 minutes, 15 cars were crammed near the front entrance, creating a massive traffic bottleneck. I watched the screen as the driver of the red G-Wagon grew impatient. Instead of waiting for someone to shift positions, he yanked the steering wheel and drove straight over the custom stone curb, steering the heavy vehicle onto the zoysia grass lawn Jamal had spent 6 months meticulously cultivating. The morning dew had softened the ground. The heavy tires spun in place, tearing deep, ugly mud ruts directly through the pristine green turf. Seeing him do it, another car followed suit, and then another. In less than 10 minutes, my flawless front yard looked like a muddy pit after a monster truck rally. I stared at the screen, watching tens of thousands of dollars in custom landscaping get mindlessly destroyed by a group of privileged trust fund kids. Brenda stood on the front steps, welcoming them with a wide, beaming smile. She watched a BMW park directly on top of a bed of imported hydrangeas without saying a word, simply waving the guests toward the back patio. A wave of hypocrisy burned in my chest. When I was 10 years old, if I accidentally tracked a single blade of grass onto the cheap living room rug Brenda bought from a discount store, she would snap at me relentlessly. She demanded absolute perfection from me, constantly holding punishment over my head for the slightest mistake. Yet now, simply because these guests were wealthy, and because they represented the social status she was so desperate to claim, She stood there happily watching them tear my property apart. She allowed them to destroy a masterpiece just so she could pretend she belonged in their world. I didn't yell. I didn't drop my pen. I picked it up and told Trey to open Section 4, Paragraph C of the lease agreement. Maximum occupancy for a standard self-service weekend is strictly capped at 10 guests. Hosting any unauthorized event on the premises incurs an immediate $5,000 penalty. Most importantly, the contract dictates an additional fee of $200 per hour for every single person over the limit. Trey started running the numbers on his tablet, counting heads as people poured through the house toward the patio. The current tally hit 47 people, with even more cars arriving. We had 37 unauthorized guests, meaning that simply for breathing the air on my estate, they were racking up an extra $7,400 every hour. Jamal sent a text directly to Trey's phone, featuring photos of the torn-up lawn taken from a hidden vantage point near the maintenance shed. He estimated the minimum cost for turf replacement, soil leveling, and floral restoration would hit $50,000. Without blinking, Trey added it straight to the running bill. I turned my attention back to the patio camera, cranking the volume to maximum. Connor was standing near the outdoor kitchen, holding a mimosa, shaking hands with a group of men wearing boat shoes and expensive watches. He slapped his fraternity brothers on the back, loudly welcoming them to his brand-new summer house. He said it loudly, proudly, ensuring everyone within earshot heard it. Trey tapped his stylus on the desk, logging another $25,000 penalty for corporate misrepresentation and false claims of ownership. Connor was accumulating debt faster than his trust fund could earn interest. But Kendra was the one truly stealing the spotlight. She drifted through the crowd of wealthy guests, acting every bit the lady of the manor. Standing near the floating glass staircase, surrounded by women in designer summer dresses, she began complaining about the property taxes. She let out a dramatic sigh, telling them the closing process on the estate had been an absolute nightmare. She even pointed a manicured finger at the stairs, claiming she had argued with her architect for weeks just to get the angle of those glass steps right. I had built that staircase. I spent 3 exhausting weeks arguing with city zoning officials and structural engineers just to get those floating glass treads approved and safely installed. Every detail of this house stemmed from my vision and my hard work. Kendra was wearing my blood, sweat, and tears like a cheap knockoff accessory, feeding her massive insecurities by consuming my success. Richard Sterling led a man in a tailored suit onto the patio. I recognized him immediately. A prominent local politician who frequently dealt with real estate developers. Richard introduced Connor to the politician, bragging loudly about his son's incredible real estate mind, proudly declaring that Connor had scouted this hidden gem of a property and negotiated a brilliant off-market deal to secure it for his bride. Brenda hovered right behind them, practically vibrating with excitement. Holding her champagne glass, her chest was puffed out with pride. She had finally gotten everything she wanted, rubbing shoulders with the elite, standing in a multi-million-dollar compound, pretending her family was royalty. They all thought they had won. They thought that by hiding their independent black daughter and stealing her assets, they had successfully bought their ticket into high society. They had no idea I was watching their entire future collapse in high definition. They didn't know that every lie, every muddy tire track, and every stolen boast was being meticulously documented and monetized. The financial guillotine was hanging directly over their heads, and they were too busy drinking my champagne to notice the blade falling. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling nothing but cold, pure anticipation. It was almost time to drive up and collect my debt. Outside, the brunch party was reaching its peak, but the chaos quickly spilled into the main house. The catering staff needed to set up their carving stations and warming trays in the formal dining room. Porch. Watching the security feed in the main foyer, I saw two caterers struggling to push a massive industrial metal warming cart. Instead of lifting it over the threshold, they dragged it heavily, slamming it directly onto the custom Spanish Nero Marquina marble floor with a loud crash. Porch. The nauseating, bone-chilling screech of heavy metal grinding against imported black stone echoed through my desk speakers. Maya walked straight into the frame. She held her hand up politely but firmly, instructing the catering crew to freeze. She told them they were required to use the heavy rubber mats stored in the utility closet before pushing any industrial equipment over the stone floor. Porch. Before the crew could even move, Kendra barged into the foyer, holding a mimosa and glaring at Maya. She aggressively waved her hand, telling the workers to completely ignore my director of operations. She ordered them to push the carts into the dining room immediately because her guests were hungry and waiting. Porch. Maya held her ground, warning Kendra that moving heavy metal carts without protection would cause permanent, irreversible damage to the custom stonework. Kendra rolled her eyes, let out a loud, impatient sigh, and looked Maya dead in the eye. I own this house. If I want to replace a few cheap tiles, I'll do it whenever I feel like it. Trey gasped from across my office. Porch. I just gave a cold, tight smile. Cheap tiles. I had personally flown to a private quarry in Spain to hand-select those exact marble slabs for the entryway. The caterers gave in to Kendra's authority. They dragged the heavy metal warming carts across the floor for 30 full feet. A thick, deep white gouge was permanently carved into the flawless black marble. Porch. Trey immediately tapped a button on his tablet. The property damage clause was triggered. A mandatory $10,000 baseline fine for willful destruction of custom interior finishes. He logged the figure into our master spreadsheet, casually reminding me that replacing that specific continuous slab would actually cost around $40,000 in materials and specialized labor. Porch. I told him to add the full estimated cost to the itemized invoice. If Kendra wanted to play the wealthy lady of the manor in front of her caterers, she was going to pay for the estate's upkeep. The security feed captured my mother walking right past the fresh, terrible scar on the floor. Brenda looked straight at the damage. She didn't scold Kendra. Porch. She didn't tell the caterers to be careful with her so-called new summer home. She just stepped right over the massive gouge, holding her champagne glass, and went back to socializing. My mind flashed back to when I was 15. I was doing Brenda's laundry and accidentally spilled a single drop of bleach on her cheap discount linoleum. Porch. She made me get down on my hands and knees and scrub the entire kitchen floor for 3 hours, screaming that I was a careless, ungrateful burden who ruined everything I touched. Yet here she was, watching her golden child actively destroy tens of thousands of dollars in luxury property, smiling and taking a sip of her drink. Porch. That burning hypocrisy sat like a heavy physical weight in my chest, but it only fueled my focus. I wasn't that terrified 15-year-old girl anymore. I was the landlord here, and rent was officially due. Trey tapped my arm and pointed at the bottom left monitor. The basement feed had just gone live. Porch. Connor was leading a group of 5 men down the floating glass staircase toward my climate-controlled wine cellar. These were his old Money Country Club friends, wearing expensive loafers and holding crystal glasses. Connor confidently punched a random passcode into the cellar keypad. The system flashed red and let out a loud error, beep, denying him access. Porch. He laughed it off nervously, telling his friends the smart home system was still learning his fingerprint. He pulled out his phone and actually called Maya. I watched her answer on the hallway camera. Connor arrogantly demanded that she unlock the cellar immediately so he could show his VIP guests his collection. Porch. Maya informed him that under the self-service rental agreement he signed, the cellar was strictly off-limits. Connor's face turned bright red. His influential friends were all watching. His fragile ego was being directly challenged by a black director with a tablet. He snapped at her, yelling that he was the homeowner, and that she needed to open the door right now, or face serious consequences. Orch. Maya didn't even blink. She remotely unlocked the outer glass door so he could enter the viewing corridor, but she kept the climate-sealed vault door deadlocked. Connor puffed out his chest, accepting this tiny, pathetic victory. He pushed open the door and ushered his friends into the viewing room. I turned the volume all the way up. Orch. Connor stood in front of the glowing glass wall, pointing at the rows of vintage Bordeaux and rare Napa Valley Cabernet locked behind the glass. With grand hand gestures, he told his friends that he had personally designed the climate control system. Orch. He looked his best friend in the eye and lied, saying he spent months sourcing the reclaimed wood for the tasting table and hand-picked every single bottle to build the perfect investment collection. Trey dropped his pen onto the desk, shaking with laughter. I just stared at the screen. It took me 2 exhausting years to build that specific collection. Orch. I negotiated directly with vineyard owners, attended private, invite-only auctions, and poured my taste, my culture, and my capital into that cellar. Connor couldn't even pronounce half the French labels on those bottles, yet he stood there claiming my labor and my wealth as his own brilliant vision. Trey hit the penalty button again. Corporate misrepresentation and false claims of ownership. Orch. Another $25,000 fee was instantly added to the ledger. We watched Connor point to an extremely rare bottle, boasting about how much he paid for it at a charity auction. Every word out of his mouth was a massive, billable violation. Trey read the running total out loud to me. 5,000 base penalty for unauthorized event. Orch. 37 unauthorized guests at $200 an hour, currently sit at $7,400. 10,000 baseline breach for malicious damage to the marble, plus 40,000 estimated replacement cost. 50,000 for external landscaping damage. Orch. 25,000 for the first false claim of ownership in the driveway, and another 25,000 for Connor's arrogant performance in the cellar. It wasn't even noon on Saturday, and our fines and damages were well past $160,000. I looked at the spreadsheet flashing on the monitor. The numbers were astronomical, but they were entirely legally binding. Orch. The second Kendra bypassed the terms and conditions, she signed away her rights. She wanted so badly to prove to the Sterling family that she belonged in their elite world. To prove to Connor's parents that her family wasn't some embarrassing stereotype to be hidden away. She was so desperate to escape her real identity that she willingly attached herself to a massive financial anchor. Orch. I told Trey to prepare the official invoice on our executive letterhead, itemized down to the last cent, with exact timestamps for every violation printed right next to the fine amounts. I wanted it bound in a sleek black leather portfolio, ready to deliver. On screen, the party was reaching a fever pitch. Music pulsed through my outdoor surround sound speakers. Orch. Connor's friends were splashing in my infinity pool. Brenda was laughing loudly on my teak deck, clinking glasses with guests. They were completely intoxicated by the illusion of their own status. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought they had successfully erased me from the family narrative and replaced me with this stolen fantasy. They truly believed they were untouchable. Orch. I stood up from my desk and smoothed the front of my tailored emerald green suit. I checked my reflection in the glass window. My natural hair was styled to perfection. My presence was loud, undeniable, and absolute. The ticking clock in the office felt deafening. The trap was set, and financial ruin was locked in. Orch. There was no way Kendra or Connor could pay this massive invoice without begging the Sterlings for a bailout. And once his old money parents realized this entire marriage was built on pathetic lies and stolen property, there was no way they were going to save them. The patio brunch revelry continued outside, but my eyes locked onto the camera feed in the main living room. Orch. The heavy mahogany doors were wide open, letting the lake breeze drift through, and a few guests were wandering around indoors. Patricia Sterling stepped away from the noisy crowd outside. Holding a crystal champagne flute, she slowly walked toward the massive feature wall in the center of the living room. I leaned forward, resting both hands on the cool glass of my desk. That feature wall wasn't just a structural element. It was a deeply personal gallery. Over the past 7 years, I had poured my heart into collecting original African American fine art. These weren't commercial prints. They were massive oil paintings and mixed media pieces from prominent emerging Black artists out of Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit. The centerpiece of the wall was a breathtaking 6-foot portrait of a Black woman wearing a gold leaf crown. I bought that painting the day I closed my first multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal. It was my proof of survival, my cultural pride, and a testament to the empire I built with my own hands. Patricia stood in front of the gold leaf portrait, tilting her head as she studied the brushwork. She actually had a trained eye for fine art. On the security monitor, I saw my mother notice Patricia looking at the wall. Brenda quickly excused herself from her patio conversation and rushed inside, desperate to brown-nose her wealthy guest. Holding her own champagne glass, Brenda walked up beside Patricia. I turned the audio feed all the way up, filling my office with the room's ambient chatter. "This is a striking collection," Patricia said, pointing a finger toward the wall. "The texture is incredible. I don't recognize the signature, but the technique is museum quality." Did Connor and Kendra commission these pieces specifically for this space? My mother didn't hesitate for even a second. She didn't even look at the painting. She looked straight at Patricia's expensive jewelry and let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. Brenda waved her hand in the air like she was shooing away a fly. "Oh, these old things?" Brenda said, her voice dripping with fake modesty. "Not at all, Patricia. I actually picked these up at a local flea market just last month. We just needed a few large pieces to add a pop of color and fill up the blank walls until the kids can hire a real interior designer. You know how it is when you first move in. You just throw whatever you can find on the walls until you get something more elegant and refined." Those words echoed through my office speakers. A local flea market, just to add a pop of color until they find something more elegant. The air in my office froze completely. Trey stopped typing on his tablet. Total silence stretched for 5 suffocating seconds. I didn't feel a surge of hot anger. I felt something entirely different. My blood ran cold, replaced by a razor-sharp, icy clarity. Patricia nodded and took a sip of her mimosa. "Well, they do add a bit of rustic charm," she murmured, completely accepting the lie. Kendra walked into the living room and linked arms with our mother. Looking at the stunning, gold leaf portrait of the Black woman, Kendra wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Yeah!" Kendra piped up eagerly. "Connor and I are actually planning to take all of these down next weekend. We're going to replace them with some neutral landscapes. Maybe a few soft sailboat watercolors to fit the lake house aesthetic. These are just a little too loud for our taste." Too loud. That was the exact phrase they had used to describe me my entire life. Too loud, too unrefined, too much. I stared at the screen. The financial fines didn't matter anymore. The $25,000 penalties, the property damage, the unauthorized guest fees. All of it faded into the background. This was no longer just a contract dispute. This was a deliberate, deep erasure of my existence. Brenda and Kendra were standing in a sanctuary of Black excellence, inside a fortress of wealth built by a Black woman, who had survived their relentless emotional abuse. Yet instead of feeling even an ounce of pride, they were actively stripping away its value, its culture, and its dignity, just to make a wealthy white woman feel comfortable. They treated my life's work like junk picked up at a swap meet. They erased my identity just to buy their way into a family that would never truly respect them. I reached out and grabbed the top of my laptop. I didn't log another violation. I didn't ask Trey to update the invoice. We were done playing the waiting game. We were done letting the meter run. I slammed the laptop shut. Torch. The sharp snap of the metal casing rang through the quiet room like a gunshot. Trey slowly lowered his stylus and turned to look at me. He had been with me for 4 years. He had watched me negotiate with ruthless developers and dismantle hostile corporate takeovers. But he later told me he had never seen a look like that on my face. In that moment, I stood up from my desk. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit, checked my cuffs, and made sure every single detail of my appearance was flawless. I wasn't going to show up like an angry, bitter sister. I was going to arrive like the Grim Reaper in designer heels. "Get the security team," I said, my voice dead, quiet, and calm. Trey didn't ask a single question. He grabbed his tablet and radio and hit speed dial for our private corporate security team. In less than 30 seconds, we walked out of the executive suite and stepped briskly down the long glass hallway. Employees in the open office area took one look at our faces and immediately cleared a path. The elevator ride down to the private underground garage was dead silent. The heavy metal doors slid open to reveal my personal driver waiting by my sleek black Maybach. My 2 top corporate security guards were already standing by the car. Off-duty police officers in dark tailored suits and earpieces, looking completely stern. They were highly experienced in handling hostile evictions without breaking a sweat. I looked at the lead officer and told him that due to severe breaches of contract, we were executing an immediate lease termination. I explained that the tenant was currently throwing an unauthorized party with over 40 guests and alcohol. I instructed him that under no circumstances was anyone to disrespect my property or my staff, and if anyone refused to leave, they were to be processed directly as trespassers. The guard nodded sharply and opened the rear door of the Maybach for me. I slid into the back seat as the dark-tinted windows isolated me from the outside world. The leather interior was cool, smelling of expensive polish. Trey sat next to me, opening his tablet one last time to finalize the printed invoice. He wirelessly sent the document to the portable printer built into the car's center console. The machine hummed, spitting out 3 pages of meticulously itemized, indisputable financial consequences. Each page clear, perfect, and chilling. I instructed the driver to head straight to the Oconee Lake Estate. The drive from downtown to the lake property usually took 90 minutes. I spent every single minute of that journey staring straight ahead. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't check my email. I mapped out the exact layout of my property in my head. I visualized the patio, the grand foyer, the faces of the Sterling family, and the sheer terror that was about to overtake my mother and sister. For 33 years, I swallowed their insults. I let them keep me in the shadows while they paraded around, pretending to be perfect. They thought they had finally won. They thought they had successfully locked me out of their new high society life. But they forgot one critical detail. They forgot who actually owned the key. The Maybach merged onto the highway and picked up speed. We were an armed, extremely expensive storm, heading straight for their fragile house of cards. I took a slow, deep breath. The wait was over. It was showtime. The drive took a full 90 minutes. Sitting in the back of the Maybach, I watched the city skyline fade into dense Georgia pine forests. Trey sat beside me, holding the sleek black leather portfolio that contained a 3-page itemized invoice totaling $65,000 in damages and penalties. Up front, my driver handled the winding country roads with smooth precision, while my 2 security officers, Jackson and Malik, sat in absolute silence. Off-duty tactical officers wearing dark tailored suits and earpieces, they radiated a quiet, serious authority. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel that nervous knot in my stomach that usually came with confronting my mother. Brenda had spent my whole life teaching me to back down, training me to swallow my pride, keep my voice down, and make myself small so Kendra could shine. But I wasn't that child seeking validation anymore. I was a multi-million-dollar entity coming to evict a hostile tenant. The Maybach turned onto my private road, and the massive custom wrought iron security gates came into view. Jamal was standing by the guardhouse, and the moment he saw my car approach, he hit the override switch. The heavy gates swung open, welcoming the real owner home. Porch. The second my tires crossed the threshold, the reality of their disrespect hit me like a slap in the face. The security cameras had already shown me the damage, but seeing it in person was a completely different, gut-wrenching experience. Luxury cars were parked all over my property in total chaos. Porch. A silver Porsche was parked at a sharp angle, completely crushing a bed of imported white hydrangeas. A bright red SUV was stuck deep in the mud of my custom lawn, leaving torn, deep brown scars across the pristine green landscape. They had treated my multi-million-dollar compound like a cheap frat house parking lot. Porch. My driver carefully navigated through the maze of expensive cars, smoothly pulling the Maybach to a stop in the circular motor court right in front of the grand mahogany doors. The heavy bass from the brunch party on the back patio vibrated through the air. A few of Connor's wealthy country club friends were lingering near the front entrance, holding mimosas and laughing loudly. Porch. The moment my car stopped, their laughter died down. A Maybach escorted by two imposing security guards tends to command immediate silence. My driver stepped out and opened my door. I stepped onto the gravel driveway wearing my emerald green power suit, sharp, tailored, and unyielding. My natural hair was impeccably styled. Porch. I didn't look like the embarrassing sister they tried to hide. I looked like the person who held the deed to their lives. Trey stepped out right behind me, clutching the black portfolio. Jackson and Malik flanked me with military precision. Keeping a tight formation, we walked straight up the wide concrete steps toward the main entrance. Porch. Through the floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows beside the front door, I saw her. Brenda was standing in the grand foyer, holding a crystal champagne flute and laughing at something Patricia Sterling had just said. Then Brenda casually glanced out the window and spotted me coming up the steps. I watched the color completely drain from her face. Porch. Her jaw dropped, and her eyes widened in pure terror. She practically slammed her champagne glass onto a nearby console table, spilling wine everywhere, mumbled something frantic to Patricia, and rushed toward the front door. She wanted to intercept me. She had to stop me from stepping inside and shattering the fragile illusion she had built for the Sterlings. Porch. Brenda shoved the heavy mahogany door open, slipped outside, and quickly pulled it shut behind her to keep the wealthy guests inside from hearing us. She stood at the top of my front steps, spreading her arms to physically block the entrance. Her chest was heaving, her face flushed with panic and rage. "What are you doing here?" Brenda hissed in a frantic whisper. Porch. "You're supposed to be in the city. You can't be here right now. Get out of here. You're ruining everything." I stopped on the step below her, looking up into her panicked eyes, without blinking or raising my voice. "I'm ruining everything?" I repeated calmly. "Brenda, you are standing on my porch, blocking the door to my house while unauthorized guests tear up my lawn. Porch. You don't get to tell me where I can or cannot be on my own property." Brenda gripped the railing until her knuckles turned white, leaning in to try to intimidate me the way she did when I was a teenager. "Listen to me, Zuri. Connor's parents are right inside the foyer. Kendra is finally getting the family integration she deserves. You will not march up here and turn this into a scene about you. Porch. I am your mother, and I am ordering you to turn around, get back in that car, and leave right now. We'll deal with your little temper tantrum on Monday." I let out a slow, dry chuckle. "Temper tantrum? You think the itemized invoice Trey is holding is a temper tantrum? You think 40 unauthorized guests tearing up my custom landscaping is just a minor inconvenience we can discuss on Monday?" Porch. I took a step up, forcing her to look me in the eye. "You're not acting like a mother right now, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. You're a tenant currently in severe breach of a binding commercial lease agreement. Porch. You've violated occupancy limits, caused tens of thousands of dollars in property damage, harassed my staff, and stood in my living room telling Patricia Sterling that my fine art collection was cheap junk from a flea market. Brenda actually gasped, realizing I had heard everything, realizing that the security cameras she thought were just for show had been actively recording every single lie. Porch. You spied on us, she gasped, clutching her chest like a victim. You bugged your own house to spy on your family. The security monitoring was fully disclosed on page 5 of the contract Kendra signed this morning, I corrected her. You didn't read it because you were too busy trying to steal my success to impress people who will never truly respect you. Brenda's face twisted in pure fury. Porch. Dropping the panicked whisper, her voice rose sharply. I don't care what you think you heard. You are not getting into this house. I will stand here all day if I have to. You will not humiliate your sister in front of the Sterlings. Porch. She squared her shoulders and planted her feet firmly in front of the door handle, thinking she could win a battle of wills, assuming I would back down to avoid a scene in the driveway. She forgot. I brought backup. I didn't argue. I didn't waste a single breath trying to reason with someone who was completely out of touch with reality. I simply turned my head slightly and gave Jackson a subtle nod. Porch. Jackson stepped forward smoothly. Standing 6'4" and 230 pounds, he didn't look angry. He looked completely professional, like a man clearing an obstacle off a sidewalk. Excuse me, ma'am, Jackson said, his deep voice carrying quiet authority. Please step aside for the property owner. Don't touch me, Brenda yelled, trying to hold her ground. Porch. I'm warning you. I'll call the police. Jackson didn't even blink at the threat. He extended a massive hand, firmly placing it on Brenda's shoulder. With one smooth, effortless motion, he physically moved her aside, guiding her to the edge of the porch and holding her gently but firmly against a stone pillar. Brenda gasped in shock, struggling against his grip, but she couldn't move an inch. Porch. She was completely neutralized. You can't do this, Brenda sobbed, her voice breaking as the reality of her helplessness finally hit her. Zuri, please, don't do this to us. Without giving her a backward glance, I walked right past her. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handle of my custom mahogany door. Trey followed right behind me, clutching the black portfolio. Porch. The time for quiet porch arguments was over. I pushed the door open and stepped directly into the grand foyer, ready to bring their beautiful, fake world crashing down. The moment I crossed the threshold of my own home, the shift in energy was electric. The grand foyer opened into the massive living room, where Connor's 40 upper-class friends were socializing. Porch. A curated jazz playlist was streaming through my surround sound speakers, while waiters in crisp white shirts moved through the crowd with silver trays of mimosas and imported caviar. It looked straight out of a luxury magazine spread, but every bit of it was funded by my hard work and built on my sister's pathetic lies. I didn't hesitate. Porch. I walked with a steady, commanding rhythm, the stride of someone who owned the land beneath her feet. My emerald green suit caught the natural light filtering through the floor to sailing smart glass windows, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Porch. Jackson and Malik flanked me, their imposing presence radiating a silent authority that made the guests nearest the entrance instinctively step back and clear a path. Trey walked beside me, holding the black leather portfolio like an officer executing a warrant. Someone noticed the security team first. Porch. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd near the entrance, and the background chatter quickly died down. A caterer rushed to tap the smart home control panel on the wall, and the jazz music cut off abruptly. The sudden, absolute silence in the massive room was deafening. I scanned the room and instantly locked eyes with my target. Porch. Kendra was standing near the custom stone fireplace with a glass of champagne. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with shock. All the country club confidence she had displayed on the security camera vanished in an instant. She looked just like the insecure girl who used to steal my clothes and cry to our mother when I asked for them back. Porch. Connor stood right beside her, his face turning pale as chalk. He took a hesitant step forward, opening his mouth to speak. I didn't even look at him. I completely bypassed them both, refusing to give them the satisfaction of my attention. Ignoring them was the ultimate power move, proving they weren't the hosts of this party. They were just unauthorized tenants. Porch. My eyes were locked on the center of the room. Richard and Patricia Sterling were standing right in front of the gold leaf portrait of the black woman. The piece Patricia had admired moments earlier, and Brenda had dismissed as a flea market find. They looked confused by the sudden silence and the arrival of a tactical security detail. Porch. I stopped 3 feet from Patricia, standing tall and letting my presence fill the space they had tried to strip my culture from. I extended my right hand to them, my voice clear and resonant as it cut through the heavy silence. "Good morning," I said with a polite, razor-sharp smile. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Porch. I'm Zuri, founder and CEO of Oasis Realty, and the sole legal owner of this property. Patricia stared at my extended hand like it was a live grenade. She slowly looked up at my face, then turned to Connor in total confusion. Richard narrowed his eyes, stepping slightly in front of his wife. "I beg your pardon," Richard spoke up, his deep voice carrying the tone of a man used to taking charge. Porch. Owner? Connor told us he and Kendra just closed on this estate. I assume there's been a massive misunderstanding here, young lady. I didn't flinch at the condescending tone. I lowered my hand and crossed my arms. There's no misunderstanding, Richard, I replied smoothly. Your son is a fraud. He doesn't own a single square inch of the land you're standing on. Porch. I bought this property 5 years ago. I hired the architects, I negotiated the zoning permits, and I built this compound from the ground up. A collective gasp broke out among the guests surrounding us, followed by hushed, frantic whispers. Brenda came bursting through the front door behind me, out of breath and looking frantic. Porch. She pushed through the guests and grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my suit jacket. Don't listen to her, Brenda yelled, her voice high and desperate. Patricia, she's just bitter. This is my older daughter, Zuri. She's always been terribly jealous of Kendra. She's having a mental breakdown. We tried to get her help, but she refused. Just ignore her. Security will escort her out. Porch. I slowly turned my head and looked down at my mother's hand gripping my sleeve. I didn't even have to say a word. Jackson stepped forward instantly, his towering frame casting a shadow over Brenda. He didn't touch her this time, he simply leaned down and commanded her in a low, dangerous tone to take her hands off the property owner immediately. Porch. Brenda snapped her hand back as if my jacket had caught fire. She shrank back but kept pleading with Patricia to believe her. You're humiliating your sister! Brenda cried, genuine tears of panic welling in her eyes. You're ruining the most important week of her life just because you can't stand to see her happy. I turned my back on Brenda, completely ignoring her dramatic act. Porch. I looked straight at Kendra, who was visibly shaking near the fireplace. I didn't humiliate you, Kendra, I said, my voice carrying to the farthest corners of the room. You humiliated yourself the moment you looked at these wealthy people and decided your own flesh and blood wasn't worthy to sit at the same table. Porch. You hid your wedding from me because you thought my unapologetic identity would embarrass you in front of your new in-laws. Yet here you are, standing in my house, drinking my champagne, breathing my air, and claiming my hard-earned success as your own, just to get them to accept you. Patricia Sterling looked utterly appalled. She looked back and forth between Kendra and Connor. Porch. Connor, what is she talking about? Patricia demanded. Whose house is this? Connor swallowed hard, looking around desperately for an exit. Mom, it's complicated. Kendra and I just wanted to make a good impression on you guys. We rented it for the weekend to show you we were doing well. We were going to tell you the truth later. Porch. Rented? Richard boomed, his face turning a deep shade of red. You stood on that patio 20 minutes ago and told the city commissioner that you personally designed that wine cellar. You lied straight to my face, Connor. You lied to our friends. Kendra suddenly broke down, covering her face with her hands and sobbing loudly to draw sympathy from the crowd. Orch. Connor tried to put an arm around her, but she shoved him away. Their carefully constructed illusion of high society had completely collapsed. Brenda realized the game was up, the act was over. She spun around and glared at me with pure hatred radiating from her skin. Are you happy now? Brenda screamed, her voice cracking. You ruined your sister's marriage. You took everything from her. Orch, you've always been a bitter, ungrateful child. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. You gave me nothing, I fired back, matching her intensity with stone-cold corporate composure. You gave me nothing but constant criticism while draining your bank accounts to fund Kendra's failures. You told me I would fail, all while treating me like an unwanted burden. Orch, I built this empire without a shred of your support, and now you expect me to let you use it as a prop for your lies? I turned back to face Richard and Patricia, who were watching the exchange in shocked silence. I apologize for the disruption to your brunch, I said smoothly, stepping back into my role as CEO. Orch, I'm sure it's disappointing to discover that the family you're marrying into is not only financially reckless, but morally bankrupt. But my issue isn't with you. It's with the tenants who are currently in severe violation of a commercial lease agreement. I held out my hand to Trey. Orch. He stepped forward with a cold, solid expression, opening the black leather portfolio to pull out the freshly printed documents. The final phase of the eviction was about to begin, and it was going to take everything they had left. Aunt Viv demanded to see the receipt, and I emailed it to her before hanging up. Sunday morning service at my parents' church was the ultimate social battlefield. Orch. For the past month, Brenda had paraded down the aisles, boasting to anyone who would listen about her daughter marrying into the elite Sterling family. But Aunt Viv was the head of the women's committee, and by the time Brenda and Jerome walked through the sanctuary doors, that Sunday the entire congregation had already seen the PDF of the $65,000 invoice in their group chats. Orch. According to Aunt Viv, Brenda walked in expecting the usual praise, only to be met with cold stares and harsh whispers. The pastor's wife walked right up to her in the lobby, asking aloud why she was officially evicted from her own daughter's property for damaging the grounds. Brenda turned red and tried to stutter an excuse, but the damage was permanent. Orch. The church community valued integrity and despised a pretender. Brenda and Jerome were socially sidelined, forced to sit in the back pew under the scrutiny of the people they had tried to look down on. 6 months later, I stood on the restored back patio of my Oconee compound. Orch. The custom lawn was lush and green, the Spanish marble polished like a mirror, and the sun set over the lake in brilliant gold and purple light. Maya and Jamal were setting up a private catered dinner on the teak deck, not for hostile tenants, but for my corporate leadership team, close friends, and the mentors who supported me when I had nothing. Orch. This was my chosen family, people who celebrated my ambition and respected the empire I built. I leaned against the glass railing, holding a flute of vintage champagne from my secure cellar. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of pine and absolute freedom. I took a slow, satisfying sip. Orch. The $65,000 had covered all property repairs and landscape restoration, leaving a comfortable margin that I reinvested into a new commercial renovation project. I had cut the toxic elements of my biological family out of my life for good, no longer shrinking myself to fit into their narrative. I was standing tall in the fortress I built, surrounded only by those who recognized my true worth. Orch. The greatest lesson I learned was that your value is never defined by people who refuse to see it. When toxic relatives try to shrink your identity to soothe their own insecurities, the most powerful move is to walk away, set ironclad boundaries, and build your own empire.